Queer History, Episode 10, Visibility and Violence, the 1990s. To be seen was both a blessing and a threat. Imagine, you're flipping through the channels in 1997. There's Ellen DeGeneres smiling nervously on her sitcom, and then she says it plainly for the first time on network TV. I'm gay. The laugh track plays, the audience cheers, and somewhere off screen, 1,000 bigots clutch their pearls and start writing complaint letters. Because this wasn't just a punchline, it was a warning shot. The closet door had been kicked open, and queer folks were stepping out. But what the world didn't say out loud was this: if you want to be seen, you better be ready to bleed. The 1990s weren't the beginning of queer history, but they were a new chapter, one where visibility came fast, loud, and dangerous. After decades of AIDS devastation, of funerals and fury, of government silence, queer activists in the 90s were done begging for attention. They wanted the spotlights. They wanted the legislation. They wanted justice. Groups like ACT UP and Queer Nation had already shown the power of public protest, but now, with the world watching, the movement got louder, younger, and more defiant. Teenagers started gay-straight alliances. Zines poured out of punk houses and queer collectives. College campuses hosted drag shows and kiss-ins. And somewhere in a dim basement, a kid dialed into a clunky AOL chat room and saw the words, "You are not alone." But while queer folks were finding each other, the state was quietly working to keep them in the dark. In 1993, President Bill Clinton introduced a policy that was supposed to be progressive. Let gay people serve in the military, he said, as long as they don't say they're gay. That policy was called Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And it was exactly as cruel as it sounds. You could wear the uniform, but you couldn't tell your truth. You could fight for your country, but not for your identity. If anyone found out who you were, one wrong word, one intercepted letter, one vengeful roommate, your career, your benefits, your dignity, gone. More than 13,000 service members were discharged under DADT. It was a military camouflage over a nationwide eraser. And then came October 1998. A 21-year-old college student named Matthew Shepard was at a bar in Laramie, Wyoming. He was sweet, open, and out. 2 men offered him a ride home. They drove him to the outskirts of town, tied him to a split-rail fence, pistol whipped him until his skull cracked in more than a dozen places, and left him there in the freezing cold. He was found 18 hours later, alive, by a cyclist who thought he was a scarecrow. Matthew died 5 days later. His murder shocked the nation, but it didn't surprise the queer community, because this is what they've been trying to say all along. Visibility isn't always safety. Sometimes it's a target. Still, people kept coming out. They came out on television, in classrooms, on stages, in locker rooms. They came out to friends, parents, strangers, sometimes in joy, sometimes in fear, sometimes because silence was no longer survivable. And for the first time, queer people were being seen, not just as victims, but as characters in the national story. Shows like Will and Grace brought queerness into suburban living rooms. Sanitized, cheeky, and very, very white. My So-Called Life gave us Ricky Vasquez, tender, feminine, and struggling. Boys Don't Cry, released in 1999, told the story of Brandon Tina, a trans man murdered in Nebraska, though the film itself often misgendered him and cast a cis woman in his role. Representation was growing, but it came with rules. Gay characters could be funny, but not sexual. Trans characters could exist, but only as tragedies. Black and brown queerness, practically invisible. Visibility was on the rise, but it still came with a leash. Meanwhile, the government continued its slow-motion war on queer existence. In 1996, Congress passed the Defense of Marriage Act, defending marriage as strictly between a man and a woman. Sodomy laws, many of them over centuries old, were still active in over 20 states. Conversion therapy was legal and often celebrated by churches and politicians. The moral panic machine was in overdrive, painting gay people as threats to children, to the military, to the sanctity of the American family. And every pride flag raised on TV was met with a protest sign, somewhere else that read, "God hates fags." But despite the hate, or maybe because of it, a cultural resistance bloomed. Pride parades swelled with teens in glitter and old men in leather. Drag queens held funerals, performed eulogies, and read bedtime stories. Queer bookstores became sanctuaries. Chat rooms became lifelines. We were never just surviving. We were living loudly. The 1990s were complicated, beautiful, devastating. We got more rights and more funerals, more characters on TV, and more bodies in the morgue. We got Ellen's "I'm Gay" and Matthew's "Last Breath." But in that tension, in that heartbreak, queer people made a choice. We chose to be visible. We chose glitter over guilt. We chose community over shame. We chose life. Messy, dangerous, radiant life. And we built something real. Something the world couldn't unsee, no matter how hard it tried. Thank you for tuning into Queer History, and I look forward to next week's episode. Thank you for tuning into Queer History, and I hope you have a gay day.